What if your twin sister seduced your husband while you were undergoing chemotherapy, then convinced him to leave you during your cancer treatment? I'm a victim of this betrayal by my own blood. I'm Maria, 32, and this is how family loyalty died with my cancer diagnosis. When you're battling cancer, you expect your family and spouse to rally around you with love and support, not to use your vulnerability as an opportunity for the ultimate betrayal. I'm Maria Santos, 32, and during my 8-month fight against breast cancer, my identical twin sister Elena seduced my husband Carlos and convinced him to leave me while I was still undergoing chemotherapy. Elena and I had always been close despite our different personalities. She was outgoing and social, while I was more reserved and career-focused, but we'd maintained a strong sisterly bond throughout our adult lives. When I married Carlos 3 years ago, Elena seemed genuinely happy for us and became a regular part of our social life. Carlos worked as a physical therapist while I managed marketing for a local nonprofit. Our marriage felt stable and loving, built on shared values and genuine partnership. When I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer 18 months ago, Carlos initially seemed committed to supporting me through treatment and recovery. "Maria, we're going to beat this together," Carlos said after my diagnosis. "I'll be with you every step of the way." Carlos's initial response seemed genuinely loving and committed to our marriage vows about sickness and health. Elena also appeared to be incredibly supportive during my cancer diagnosis, offering to help with household tasks, accompany me to medical appointments, and provide emotional support during the difficult treatment process. "Maria, you're going to get through this, and I'll be here to help however you need," Elena said after learning about my diagnosis. Family sticks together during times like this. Elena's sisterly support seemed authentic and comforting during the scariest period of my life. The chemotherapy treatment was brutal, causing severe fatigue, nausea, and physical weakness that made it difficult for me to maintain normal household responsibilities or social activities. Elena volunteered to help Carlos manage our home and provide companionship during my treatment periods. "I'll come over to cook dinner and help Carlos with cleaning so you can focus on resting and recovering," Elena offered. "You don't need to worry about household stuff while you're fighting cancer." Elena's practical support seemed generous and family-oriented, allowing me to concentrate on treatment without feeling guilty about the burden my illness was placing on Carlos. 5 months into treatment, Elena started spending entire days at our house while I was resting or at medical appointments. She'd be there when I woke up from naps and would stay for dinner most evenings, creating a domestic routine that felt increasingly like she was living with us. "Elena's been such a huge help," Carlos would say when I'd express concerns about how much time she was spending in our home. "I don't know how I'd manage everything without her support." Carlos's appreciation for Elena's help seemed reasonable, but I started feeling like a guest in my own home while Elena took on many of the household responsibilities I was too weak to handle. 6 months into treatment, I started finding evidence that Carlos and Elena were spending intimate time together when I was sleeping or at medical appointments. I'd discover wine glasses and romantic dinner settings that suggested they'd been having private dinners together. I'd find Elena's personal belongings in our bedroom and bathroom, indicating she was using our private spaces when I wasn't present. When I asked about these signs of intimacy, both Carlos and Elena provided explanations that minimized the romantic implications. "Elena and I had dinner while you were sleeping because we didn't want to disturb your rest," Carlos would say. "She left some things here because she's been helping so much with household management." Their explanations always focused on caregiving and family support, rather than acknowledging the inappropriate intimacy of their behavior. 7 months into my treatment, I was strong enough to attend Elena's birthday party, which Carlos had helped organize while I'd been too sick to participate in the planning. During the party, I watched Carlos and Elena interact with the ease and affection of an established couple. They moved around the room together, shared private conversations, and displayed body language that suggested romantic intimacy rather than family friendship. When I mentioned their behavior to our cousin Sophia, she looked uncomfortable and suggested we talk privately. "Maria, I didn't want to say anything while you're dealing with cancer, but Carlos and Elena have been acting like a couple for months," Sophia revealed. "Everyone in the family has noticed, but no one wanted to stress you during treatment." I realized that my entire extended family had been witnessing Carlos and Elena's affair while protecting me from the knowledge during my cancer treatment. The confrontation happened the next day when I directly asked Carlos and Elena about their relationship. "I need both of you to tell me honestly what's been happening between you while I've been sick." Carlos and Elena looked at each other before Elena answered. "Maria, Carlos and I have developed feelings for each other. We never intended for this to happen." "You've been having an affair while I've been fighting cancer?" "We've been supporting each other through a very stressful time," Carlos said. "Your illness has been hard on everyone, and Elena and I found comfort in each other." They were framing their affair as a natural response to the stress of my illness, rather than a betrayal of our marriage and sisterhood. We didn't want to burden you with relationship problems while you were focused on recovery, Elena added. We were trying to protect you from additional stress. Elena was claiming that their affair was actually protective of my health and well-being. The most devastating revelation came when Carlos announced that he wanted a divorce so he could pursue his relationship with Elena openly. Maria, I care about you and want you to recover fully, but I've realized that Elena and I have a connection that I can't ignore, Carlos said. You're leaving me while I'm still undergoing cancer treatment? I'll continue to support your medical care and recovery, but I can't continue pretending that our marriage is working when I have genuine feelings for Elena. Carlos was abandoning our marriage during my cancer treatment while positioning his betrayal as emotional honesty rather than cruel abandonment. Elena defended their timing by claiming that honesty was better than continued deception. Maria, we could have kept lying to you, but we respect you enough to be truthful about our feelings. We want you to focus on getting healthy without worrying about relationship problems. Elena was framing their affair revelation as respect for me, rather than acknowledging the devastating timing of their betrayal. The divorce proceedings began while I was still completing chemotherapy treatments. Carlos moved in with Elena immediately, and they started appearing publicly as a couple while I was still weak from cancer treatment. The family dynamics were permanently destroyed. Our parents were horrified by Elena's behavior, but felt torn between supporting me and maintaining relationships with both their daughters. Elena, how could you do this to your sister while she was fighting for her life? Our mother asked during a family confrontation. Mom, I didn't plan to fall in love with Carlos, Elena replied. These feelings developed naturally while we were all dealing with Maria's illness together. Elena continued to frame her betrayal as something that happened to her rather than choices she made to pursue her sister's husband during a medical crisis. The most painful aspect was losing both my husband and my twin sister simultaneously during the most vulnerable period of my life. Carlos and Elena married 6 months after our divorce was finalized, and they sent me a wedding invitation, hoping we could maintain family relationships, despite the complicated circumstances. I've been cancer-free for 8 months, but the emotional recovery from the dual betrayal has been more difficult than the physical recovery from cancer treatment. I learned that serious illness can reveal people's true character and priorities in ways that normal life circumstances don't. The most devastating lesson was that the people who are supposed to love you most unconditionally, family and spouses, can be the ones who betray you most completely when you need them most. I'm rebuilding my life with a much smaller circle of people, but ones who demonstrated genuine loyalty during my illness rather than using my vulnerability as an opportunity for betrayal. The experience taught me that survival isn't just about beating cancer, it's about identifying which relationships are worth preserving and which people revealed themselves to be dangers to your well-being. Maria's story is absolutely heartbreaking because Elena and Carlos used her cancer diagnosis as cover for their affair, then framed their betrayal as somehow protective of her health. They didn't just steal her husband, they destroyed her family support system during the fight of her life. What's most cruel is how they convinced themselves they were being respectful by being honest about their feelings, when really they were abandoning her during cancer treatment. That's not honesty, that's weaponizing vulnerability. Our next family story explores how inheritance planning can reveal the true priorities of people you thought you could trust. What if your daughter's husband convinced her to put you in a nursing home against your will so they could steal your house and inheritance? 5. That's what happened to me. I'm Robert, 74. And this is how family loyalty became elder abuse. When your child marries someone, you hope they've chosen a partner who will support family values and respect the relationships that came before their marriage. I'm Robert Mitchell, 74, and over the past 2 years, my son-in-law Kevin systematically convinced my daughter Jennifer to put me in a nursing home against my will so they could steal my house and manipulate my estate planning. Jennifer had always been a loving and devoted daughter throughout her adult life. After her mother passed away 5 years ago, Jennifer made sure I wasn't isolated and regularly checked on my well-being and household needs. When Jennifer married Kevin Thompson 3 years ago, he seemed like a decent man who made my daughter happy. Kevin worked in real estate and appeared to understand the value of family relationships and long-term financial planning. Robert, I'm glad Jennifer has someone like you for a father, Kevin said during our early interactions. Strong family relationships are the foundation of a stable life. Kevin's apparent respect for family values seemed genuine and appropriate for someone joining our family. I owned my home outright, a 3-bedroom house in a desirable neighborhood that I'd been living in for 35 years. The house represented my primary asset and was intended to be Jennifer's inheritance when I passed away. Jennifer knew that I valued my independence and wanted to remain in my own home as long as possible. We'd discussed my preferences for aging in place, and she'd always been supportive of helping me maintain my household and independence. Dad, I want you to feel comfortable and secure in your own home, Jennifer had said during our discussions about aging and healthcare. We'll figure out whatever support you need to stay independent. Jennifer's commitment to respecting my preferences seemed solid and caring. 2 years ago, Kevin started expressing concerns about my ability to maintain my house and live independently, despite the fact that I was managing my household, finances, and personal care without significant problems. Robert's getting older, and this house is becoming too much for him to handle. Kevin would say to Jennifer when they'd visit, he should consider moving to a community where he'd have more support and social interaction. Kevin was planting seeds of doubt about my capability and independence, framing his suggestions as concern for my well-being rather than interest in my property. Dad, Kevin noticed that your gutters need cleaning, and there are some weeds in the backyard, Jennifer would mention after their visits. Maybe we should talk about getting you more help with home maintenance. Kevin was using normal household maintenance needs as evidence that I couldn't live independently, gradually building a case that I needed institutional care. 18 months ago, Kevin started researching nursing homes and assisted living facilities, claiming he was planning ahead for my future needs. Jennifer, we should look into some options for your dad before he reaches a crisis point, Kevin would say. It's better to make these decisions proactively rather than waiting for an emergency. Kevin was creating urgency around institutional care while presenting himself as a thoughtful planner rather than someone with ulterior motives. During these discussions, Kevin would emphasize the financial benefits of selling my house while the real estate market was strong. Robert's house has appreciated significantly, Kevin would tell Jennifer. If we wait too long to sell, he might miss the peak market value that could fund his care. 1 year ago, Kevin started having private conversations with Jennifer about my declining mental capacity and safety concerns that I wasn't aware of. Jennifer, I've noticed that your dad seems confused sometimes and forgets things we've discussed, Kevin would claim when I wasn't present to defend myself. Kevin was manufacturing concerns about my mental state to justify forcing institutional care against my wishes. Dad, Kevin thinks you might not realize how much you're struggling with daily tasks, Jennifer would say. Maybe we should have a professional assessment of your needs. Jennifer was starting to trust Kevin's observations over her own direct experience of my capabilities. 8 months ago, Kevin convinced Jennifer to schedule a family meeting about my living situation and care needs, framing it as a loving intervention rather than a manipulation campaign. Robert, we're worried about you living alone in such a big house, Jennifer said during the meeting Kevin had orchestrated. Kevin found some really nice assisted living communities where you'd have social activities and support. I'm managing fine in my own home, and I don't want to move to institutional care. Dad, you might think you're managing okay, but we can see things that you might not notice about your daily functioning. Jennifer was being convinced that my own assessment of my capabilities was unreliable compared to Kevin's external observations. Kevin had researched which assisted living facilities would give him power of attorney over my financial affairs, and had already identified buyers for my house. The Sunset Manor facility has excellent care standards, and they have availability next month, Kevin announced. I've also found potential buyers for Robert's house who are willing to pay asking price. Kevin had already arranged both my institutionalization and the sale of my house before getting my consent or agreement. Dad, this power of attorney paperwork will make it easier for us to help you with medical and financial matters, Jennifer explained. Kevin says it's standard documentation for family care planning. I refused to sign the documents, but Kevin convinced Jennifer that my refusal was evidence of cognitive decline and inability to make rational decisions. Jennifer, your father's resistance to reasonable care planning shows that he's not thinking clearly about his situation, Kevin said. We might need to pursue guardianship to protect his interests. 4 months ago, Kevin orchestrated a situation where I'd appear to have a medical emergency that would justify emergency institutional placement. Kevin called 911 claiming I'd seemed confused and disoriented during a visit, despite the fact that I'd been functioning normally. The paramedics found nothing wrong with me, but Kevin convinced them that I needed evaluation for possible dementia. At the hospital, Kevin told medical staff that I'd been having increasing confusion and safety incidents at home, creating a medical record that supported institutional placement. Mr. Mitchell's family reports ongoing concerns about his ability to live independently, the discharge planner wrote, based entirely on Kevin's fabricated reports. 3 months ago, Jennifer reluctantly agreed to Kevin's plan to move me to Sunset Manor temporarily while my house was being prepared for sale to fund my care. Dad, this is just until we can figure out the best long-term solution, Jennifer said through tears. Kevin thinks this is what's best for your safety and health. Within 2 weeks, Kevin had sold my house for below market value to a buyer who happened to be one of his real estate contacts, raising questions about whether they'd prearranged the sale. The money from my house sale went into accounts that Kevin controlled through power of attorney documents Jennifer had signed when she believed they were temporary care arrangements. 2 months ago, I learned that Kevin had been planning this asset theft for over a year, using his real estate expertise to identify my house's value and develop a strategy for legal theft through guardianship manipulation. Kevin's been researching elder care law and asset protection strategies. A former neighbor told me when they visited the nursing home. He knew exactly how to use the system to take control of your property. Kevin had systematically studied how to exploit elder care systems and family relationships to steal assets while appearing to provide caring support. Robert's demands to leave the facility show that he's not capable of making rational decisions about his care needs, Kevin told the facility administrators. His family needs to protect him from his own poor judgment. Kevin was using my entirely reasonable desire for independence as evidence of mental incapacity that justified continued captivity. I've been trapped in this nursing home for 3 months while Kevin controls my finances, and Jennifer believes she's protecting me from my own declining mental capacity. Mr. Mitchell, your son-in-law has been very thorough about documenting your care needs, my attorney explained. Overturning guardianship arrangements requires proving that the original assessments were fraudulent. Kevin used his knowledge of real estate and elder law to create a legal theft that appears legitimate while systematically destroying my independence and family relationships. Jennifer is caught between her husband's professional expertise and her growing suspicion that she's been manipulated into betraying her father. Dad, I'm starting to realize that Kevin might have had other motives for pushing institutional care, Jennifer said during a recent visit. But reversing everything is complicated now that legal arrangements are in place. The most devastating aspect is that Kevin has successfully stolen my house, my independence, and my relationship with my daughter, while convincing everyone that he was providing caring family support. Kevin taught me that some people view marriage to family members as opportunities to access and steal generational wealth rather than joining family support systems. Robert's story is absolutely devastating because Kevin weaponized elder care systems to commit legal theft while convincing 8. Jennifer thought she was protecting her father. He didn't just steal a house, he stole a man's independence, dignity, and relationship with his daughter. What's most calculated is how Kevin used his real estate expertise to create a systematic theft that appeared to be caring family planning. He turned aging into a vulnerability to exploit rather than a transition to support. Our third family story explores how wedding planning can become a battlefield when family members prioritize their own agendas over the couple's wishes. What if your mother-in-law systematically sabotaged your wedding planning to force your fiancé to choose between marrying you or maintaining his family relationships? I've been manipulated this way. I'm Nicole, 28, and this is how wedding planning became family warfare. When you're planning your wedding, you hope your future in-laws will be supportive and welcoming, not actively working to sabotage your marriage before it even begins. I'm Nicole Chen, 28, and for 8 months, my future mother-in-law, Patricia, systematically sabotaged every aspect of my wedding planning to create enough chaos and conflict that my fiancé Edward would choose to cancel our wedding rather than deal with family drama. Edward Williams and I had been together for 3 years when we got engaged, and our relationship felt solid and ready for marriage. We shared values about family, career, and future goals, and we'd navigated previous challenges with communication and compromise. Edward's mother, Patricia, had always been polite but distant during our relationship. She'd make comments about wanting Edward to keep his options open and suggestions that we were rushing into commitment despite our multi-year relationship. Edward's still young and has so much potential, Patricia would say when discussing our future plans. Marriage is such a big decision that shouldn't be made hastily. Patricia's concerns seemed like normal parental caution rather than active opposition to our relationship. When Edward proposed, Patricia's response was notably lukewarm compared to the enthusiasm of my family and our friends. Well, if this is what Edward wants, I suppose we'll support his decision, Patricia said when we announced our engagement. I just hope he's thought through all the implications. Patricia's qualified support felt disappointing but not necessarily hostile or threatening to our wedding plans. We decided to have a traditional wedding with both families involved in the planning process. Patricia volunteered to help coordinate certain aspects of the celebration, claiming she wanted to contribute to making our day special. I'd be happy to help with vendor coordination and family logistics, Patricia offered. I have experience with event planning, and I want to make sure everything goes smoothly. Patricia's willingness to help seemed generous and family-oriented, making me feel optimistic about building a positive relationship with my future mother-in-law. Our florist would call to say that the flower arrangements Patricia had ordered were not available, and would need to be substituted with completely different options that didn't match our vision. I'm so sorry about these coordination issues, Patricia would say when vendors would call with problems. Wedding planning is so complicated, and sometimes communication gets confused between multiple people. Patricia positioned herself as trying to help while creating problems that made our wedding planning feel chaotic and stressful. 4 months into planning, Patricia started creating conflicts with my family about wedding traditions and cultural expectations. Nicole's family has some unusual customs that might make other guests uncomfortable, Patricia would tell Edward. We should discuss whether certain traditions are appropriate for a mixed cultural celebration. Patricia was manufacturing cultural conflicts that didn't actually exist, creating tension between our families over wedding elements that my family and I had never insisted upon. When my parents would suggest incorporating certain traditions that were important to our family, Patricia would claim these requests were demanding or inconsiderate of Edward's family preferences. Nicole's parents seemed to want this wedding to be entirely about their culture, Patricia would tell relatives. I'm concerned that Edward's family traditions aren't being respected. Patricia was creating false narratives about family conflicts to turn relatives against our wedding plans. 5 months into planning, Patricia started having health issues that required Edward's constant attention and support, making him less available for wedding planning and more stressed about family responsibilities. Edward, I've been having chest pains and anxiety attacks, Patricia would claim during important wedding planning periods. I think the stress of the wedding is affecting my health. Patricia's medical complaints always seemed to coincide with important wedding deadlines or family meetings, requiring Edward to prioritize her care over wedding preparations. When Edward would suggest that Patricia see medical professionals about her symptoms, she'd claim that family stress was the cause and that reducing wedding pressure would resolve her health problems. The doctor said my symptoms are stress-related, Patricia would report. Maybe we should consider simplifying the wedding plans to reduce everyone's anxiety. 6 months into planning, Patricia started spreading rumors among extended family members that I was controlling and demanding about wedding arrangements, despite the fact that I'd been flexible and accommodating about most decisions. Nicole has very specific expectations about every detail, Patricia would tell Edward's relatives. She doesn't seem willing to compromise on anything, which is causing stress for everyone. Patricia's family members started expressing concerns to Edward about whether I was the right fit for their family, based entirely on Patricia's false characterizations of my behavior. When Edward would defend me and explain that I'd been reasonable about wedding planning, Patricia would suggest that I was manipulating him and that he couldn't see the situation clearly because he was too emotionally involved. Edward, you might not realize how demanding Nicole has been because you want to make her happy, Patricia would say, but the rest of the family can see patterns that you might be missing. Patricia was isolating Edward from family support while making him feel like he had to choose between his family's approval and his relationship with me. 7 months into planning, Patricia orchestrated a major family conflict during our engagement party that was designed to create maximum embarrassment and relationship damage. Patricia invited Edward's ex-girlfriend Emma to the engagement party without telling Edward or me, claiming that Emma was family friend who deserved to be included in our celebration. I thought Edward would want his longtime friend Emma to share in his happiness, Patricia explained when Emma appeared at our engagement party. They have such a meaningful history together. Emma's presence at our engagement party created awkward tension and gave Patricia opportunities to reminisce about Edward's previous relationship in front of our guests. Emma and Edward were such a perfect match, Patricia said loudly during the party. I always thought they'd end up together. Patricia used our engagement party as a platform to publicly express regret about Edward's relationship choices while embarrassing me in front of friends and family. 8 months into planning, Patricia escalated her sabotage by claiming that the wedding was causing such family stress that she might not be able to attend. Edward, this wedding planning has become so contentious and stressful that I'm not sure I can participate, Patricia announced 2 months before our wedding date. Mom, what specific problems are you referring to? Nicole and I have tried to be accommodating about family preferences. Nicole's demands and expectations have created tension throughout our family. Several relatives have expressed concerns about the cultural conflicts and planning disputes. The final manipulation came when Patricia claimed that choosing to marry me would mean Edward was abandoning his family responsibilities and prioritizing his wife over his mother's well-being. Edward, if you proceed with this wedding despite all the family concerns, it will show that you care more about Nicole's happiness than your family's feelings, Patricia said during a private conversation. Mom, I love Nicole and want to build a life with her. I also want to maintain good family relationships, but I can't cancel my wedding because of planning stress. If you marry Nicole after everything that's happened, I'll know that I've lost my son to someone who doesn't respect our family values. Patricia was forcing Edward to choose between marrying me and maintaining his relationship with his mother. "Nicole, I love you, but I can't marry you right now with all this family conflict," Edward said. "Maybe if we wait and let things calm down, we can plan a simpler ceremony that doesn't create so much stress." Edward was capitulating to Patricia's manipulation rather than recognizing that she'd systematically created the conflicts she was now using to prevent our marriage. 6 months later, Edward broke up with me entirely, explaining that the ongoing family tension was too difficult to manage and that he needed to prioritize family harmony. Patricia had successfully destroyed our relationship by creating enough chaos and conflict that Edward chose to end our engagement rather than stand up to her manipulation. 3 months after our breakup, I learned through mutual friends that Patricia had immediately started introducing Edward to women she considered more suitable for their family. Patricia's been hosting dinner parties with eligible daughters of her friends, a mutual acquaintance told me. She's been very active in Edward's social life since you two broke up. Patricia had been planning to replace me from the moment we got engaged, using wedding sabotage as a strategy to eliminate me while appearing to be concerned about family harmony. Patricia taught me that wedding planning can be weaponized by family members who want to prevent marriages without appearing to be directly hostile or controlling. The most important lesson was that partners need to be willing to protect their relationships from family manipulation, even when that manipulation is disguised as concern for family harmony. Nicole's story shows how wedding planning can become a weapon when family members are determined to prevent a marriage. Patricia didn't just disapprove of Nicole, she orchestrated months of systematic sabotage designed to make Edward choose between his fiancée and his family. What's most manipulative is how Patricia created all the problems she then used as evidence that the wedding was too stressful and contentious. She manufactured family conflicts, then used those conflicts to justify breaking up the relationship. Now let's shift to our cheating partner stories, starting with someone who used their partner's career advancement as cover for conducting affairs. Want to see more of these? Click subscribe. Otherwise, we won't see each other again. What if your husband turned your home into his personal hookup location every time you traveled for work, using your business success to facilitate his affairs? That's my fair share of life-changing betrayals. I'm Mara, 31, and this is how career advancement became betrayal logistics. When you're building a successful career that requires travel, you expect your spouse to be proud of your achievements and supportive of your professional obligations, not to use your absence as opportunities for systematic betrayal. I'm Mara Martinez, 31, and for 2 years my husband Nikolai used my business travel schedule to turn our home into his personal dating headquarters and conducting affairs with multiple women in our bed, while I was working to advance our shared financial future. Nikolai and I had been married for 4 years when my marketing career started requiring regular travel for client meetings and conference presentations. Nikolai seemed proud of my professional success and supportive of the income growth that came with my advancing responsibilities. "Mara, I'm so proud of how your career is taking off," Nikolai would say when I'd get promoted or receive recognition for my work. "You deserve all this success, and I'm happy to manage things at home while you're traveling." Nikolai's apparent pride in my achievements seemed genuine and supportive of our partnership. My travel schedule was predictable, typically 2 or 3 trips per month, lasting between 2 and 5 days each. Nikolai knew my travel calendar well in advance and would often help me pack and prepare for important business trips. "I'll take care of everything here while you focus on your meetings," Nikolai would assure me before each trip. "Don't worry about household stuff, just concentrate on doing great work." Nikolai's willingness to manage our home during my travel seemed like genuine partnership and support for my career development. During my business trips, Nikolai and I would text regularly and have brief phone conversations about our days. He'd update me about his activities and express interest in my work meetings and professional progress. "How did the client presentation go today?" Nikolai would ask during our evening calls. "I've been thinking about you and hoping everything went well." Nikolai's consistent communication during my trips seemed loving and connected, making me feel like we were maintaining intimacy despite physical separation. 6 months into my increased travel schedule, I started noticing subtle changes in our home environment when I'd return from trips. I'd find dishes in the sink that suggested Nikolai had been cooking elaborate meals for more than one person. The living room furniture would be rearranged slightly, and there would be wine, glasses, and candles indicating romantic dinners had occurred while I was away. When I asked Nikolai about these signs of entertaining, he'd provide reasonable explanations about having friends over or treating himself to nice dinners while I was traveling. "I invited my buddy Tom over for dinner last night," Nikolai would explain. "We opened a bottle of wine and caught up while watching the game." Nikolai's explanations seemed plausible and normal for someone spending evenings alone while their spouse was working out of town. 8 months into my travel routine, I started finding women's belongings in our house, hair ties, earrings, makeup items, and clothing accessories that definitely weren't mine. Nikolai, I found these earrings in our bedroom. Do you know where they came from? Your sister mentioned losing some jewelry when she visited last week. She must have left those when she stopped by to check on the house. I don't remember my sister visiting while I was traveling. She came by Tuesday evening when you were in Chicago. We had dinner and she helped me organize some household stuff. Nikolai was using my family relationships to explain away evidence of other women being in our home while I was working. 10 months into the pattern, I started receiving strange text messages from unknown numbers, women asking if I was Nikolai's roommate, or mentioning that they'd enjoyed meeting me at parties I'd never attended. Hi Mara, great meeting you at Nikolai's party last weekend. Hope we can hang out again soon. Read one text from a number I didn't recognize. When I showed these messages to Nikolai, he'd claim that women from his work or social circles were confusing me with someone else, or that he'd mentioned my name during conversations that led to mistaken contact. I must have told Sarah from my office about you, and she got confused about whether you were at the party, Nikolai would explain. People mix up details sometimes. Nikolai's explanations were becoming more elaborate and harder to believe, but his confidence made me feel like I was being paranoid about normal social confusion. 12 months into my travel schedule, I decided to return home unexpectedly from a business trip that had been shortened due to client scheduling changes. I arrived home at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night when Nikolai expected me to be in Denver until Friday afternoon. I used my key to enter quietly, thinking I'd surprise Nikolai with my early return. I could hear music and voices coming from our living room, and as I approached from the entryway, I could see Nikolai with a woman I'd never met, both partially dressed and obviously in the middle of intimate activity on our couch. The woman was someone roughly my age, and they were clearly comfortable and familiar with each other, suggesting this wasn't a spontaneous encounter but an established relationship. When Nikolai noticed me standing in the doorway, his face showed complete panic and calculation about how to explain the situation. Mara, I thought you weren't coming home until tomorrow. I can see that. Who is this woman, and why is she half naked in our living room? The woman, clearly embarrassed and confused, started gathering her clothes while Nikolai scrambled to find explanations. This is Monica from my gym. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're having sex with another woman on our couch while I'm working out of town. Mara, this was a mistake. Monica and I have been friends for a while, and tonight we just got carried away. Nikolai was minimizing his affair as a spontaneous mistake, rather than acknowledging the systematic nature of his betrayal. Over the next week, I investigated Nikolai's activities during my business trips and discovered the full scope of his systematic affairs. Nikolai had been using my travel schedule as opportunities to conduct multiple simultaneous relationships with women who believed he was either single or in an open marriage. He'd been advertising our home as his bachelor pad, bringing different women over for romantic dinners, overnight stays, and essentially treating my business success as his personal dating service. I found evidence that Nikolai had been using dating apps while I was traveling, specifically timing his matches and dates to coincide with my business trips. Looking for fun, while my situation is temporarily flexible, read one of Nikolai's dating profiles. Great place, good wine, no complications. Good wine. Nikolai had been marketing himself as temporarily available during my work travel while maintaining our marriage during the periods when I was home. The most devastating discovery was that Nikolai had been conducting these affairs for almost 2 years, essentially the entire duration of my increased travel schedule. Every business trip I'd taken to advance our financial future had been an opportunity for Nikolai to betray our marriage while using the home we shared as his personal hookup location. When I confronted Nikolai with the complete evidence, he still tried to minimize his systematic betrayal. Mara, I never meant for this to become such a regular thing. Your travel schedule left me lonely, and I made poor decisions about how to handle that loneliness. You've been conducting multiple affairs for 2 years, using our home as your dating headquarters, while I was working to support our future. I always planned to stop the outside relationships once your travel schedule settled down. I never intended for this to become long-term betrayal. Nikolai genuinely seemed to believe that his affairs were temporary responses to my travel, rather than systematic betrayal of our marriage. The women I was seeing knew that my situation was temporary. I wasn't making long-term commitments to anyone. You were making long-term commitments to multiple women while married to me. You turned my career success into logistics for your affairs. Nikolai couldn't understand that his affairs were wrong, regardless of whether he'd promised the other women permanent relationships. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Nikolai's systematic use of our home for affairs had contaminated every space we'd shared and made reconciliation impossible. I learned that career success and travel requirements can create vulnerabilities in marriages that some spouses will exploit for personal gratification rather than viewing as challenges to overcome together. Nikolai taught me that some partners view their spouse's professional achievements as opportunities for personal freedom rather than shared success that requires continued faithfulness and commitment. The most important lesson was that marriage requires mutual respect and fidelity regardless of physical separation or professional obligations. The experience taught me that true partnership involves supporting each other's success rather than exploiting the logistics of that success for personal betrayal. Mara's story shows how someone can weaponize their partner's career success to facilitate systematic betrayal. Nikolai didn't just cheat, he turned Mara's business travel into a dating service, using her professional advancement as logistics for his affairs. What's most calculated is how Nikolai timed his affairs to coincide with her work schedule, essentially making her career success the foundation for his betrayal, while she worked to support their shared future. Our next cheating story explores how someone can use their partner's trust and generosity to conduct affairs while appearing to be devoted and committed. Consider subscribing to hear more of these mind-blowing tales. What if your fiancé was using the money you'd saved together for your wedding to pay for romantic dates with other women? That nightmare is my reality. I'm Mandy, 26, and this is how our future became funding for his betrayal. When you're engaged and saving money together for your wedding, you trust that your partner shares your commitment to your future marriage and financial goals. I'm Mandy Roberts, 26, and for 10 months, my fiancé Frank used our joint wedding savings account to finance elaborate affairs with multiple women while planning our wedding and pretending to be excited about our marriage. Frank Thompson and I had been together for 3 years when he proposed, and our relationship felt ready for marriage. We shared financial goals, discussed our future with excitement, and seemed committed to building a life together. After our engagement, we decided to combine our wedding savings into a joint account to earn better interest and simplify our budget planning. Frank suggested that consolidating our money would help us track our progress and stay disciplined about reaching our $25,000 goal. If we put our wedding money together, we can monitor our progress better and avoid spending temptations, Frank said. Having a dedicated account will keep us focused on our goal. Frank's financial planning seemed practical and committed to our shared objective of having a beautiful wedding without going into debt. We both contributed to the joint account monthly. Frank would transfer his portion from his paycheck, and I'd add my savings from my marketing job. We'd review our progress together and celebrate milestones as we got closer to our target amount. I love seeing our account balance grow, Frank would say during our monthly budget reviews. Every dollar we save gets us closer to the wedding we want. Frank's enthusiasm about our savings seemed genuine and aligned with his excitement about planning our marriage. 4 months into our joint savings plan, I started noticing that our account balance wasn't growing as quickly as expected, despite our consistent contributions. Frank, it seems like we should have more saved by now. Are there fees or charges I'm not seeing? I've had a few unexpected expenses lately that required temporary withdrawals from our wedding fund, Frank explained. I'll replace that money from my next bonus check. What kind of expenses? I thought we were avoiding any non-emergency spending from our wedding money. Just some car repairs and work equipment I needed, nothing major, and I'll definitely replace the money before we need it for wedding deposits. Frank's explanation seemed reasonable and temporary, making me feel like he was being responsible about managing short-term financial pressures. 6 months into our savings plan, I noticed several large withdrawals from our joint account that Frank hadn't mentioned during our budget discussions. When I asked about these withdrawals, Frank would provide explanations that were difficult to verify but seemed plausible. That withdrawal was for my brother's bachelor party expenses. I had to cover some costs up front, but the guys are reimbursing me. The other charge was for client entertainment costs that my company will reimburse next month. Frank's explanations always involved social obligations or work expenses that would supposedly be reimbursed, making it seem like he was managing cash flow rather than spending our wedding money inappropriately. 8 months into our savings plan, I decided to review our account statements more carefully and discovered a pattern of spending that didn't match Frank's explanations. The withdrawals were being used for expensive restaurants, hotel rooms, luxury shopping, and entertainment expenses that seemed designed for romantic dates rather than business or family obligations. I found charges for couples spa treatments, romantic dinners for 2, weekend hotel stays, and expensive gifts that Frank had never mentioned purchasing. Frank, these account statements show spending on romantic restaurants and hotels. What are these charges for? Those expenses were for planning surprise elements of our wedding and honeymoon? Frank said quickly. I've been researching venues and experiences for special touches I want to add to our celebration. Couple spa treatments and weekend hotel stays are wedding planning expenses. I wanted to experience different venues and services before making recommendations for our special events. I thought it was better to research thoroughly before committing our budget. Frank's explanations were becoming more elaborate and creative, but his confidence made me feel guilty for questioning his wedding planning methods. 9 months into our engagement, I discovered that Frank had been using dating apps and social media to connect with women while we were planning our wedding. A mutual friend mentioned seeing Frank on a dating app, with photos that clearly showed he was single and available for relationships. "Mandy, I saw Frank's profile on Tinder, and it definitely didn't mention being engaged," my friend Sarah told me. His photos and description made him seem completely single. When I confronted Frank about having active dating profiles, he claimed they were old accounts he'd forgotten to deactivate or that he was networking for business contacts. "I use those apps to meet people for work connections, not dating," Frank insisted. Lots of professionals use dating apps for networking purposes. Frank's explanations were becoming increasingly implausible, but he maintained them with such confidence that I started questioning whether I was being paranoid about normal social media usage. 10 months into our engagement, I hired a private investigator to understand Frank's activities and discovered the full scope of his systematic betrayal. Frank had been conducting multiple affairs throughout our entire engagement, using our wedding savings account to finance romantic relationships with at least 6 different women. The investigator provided documentation showing that Frank had been dating consistently while engaged to me, using our shared money to pay for romantic experiences with other women while planning our wedding. Frank had been living a double life where he maintained our engagement and wedding planning while simultaneously pursuing other relationships and using our wedding fund to finance his affairs. When I confronted Frank with the investigative evidence, he still tried to minimize his betrayal and shift responsibility. "Mandy, I never meant for this to get so complicated. I was having doubts about marriage and was exploring my feelings before making such a big commitment. You've been using our wedding money to date other women while planning our marriage. I was trying to be sure about my feelings before we got married. I thought it was better to work through my doubts before the wedding rather than having regrets afterward. You've been conducting multiple affairs and stealing our wedding money to pay for them." Frank genuinely seemed to believe that his affairs were a form of relationship research rather than systematic betrayal and financial theft. "I always planned to be faithful once we were actually married. I just needed to explore other connections before making that lifetime commitment." Frank couldn't understand that his engagement was already a commitment that required fidelity and that using our wedding money for affairs was both financial and emotional betrayal. The most devastating realization was that every conversation we'd had about our future, every moment of excitement about wedding planning, every celebration of our growing savings had been completely false on Frank's part. While I thought we were building toward our shared future, Frank was using our money and our relationship as cover for exploring other relationships and determining whether he wanted to marry me. I ended the engagement immediately and demanded repayment of my contributions to our joint account, but Frank had spent most of our wedding fund on his affairs. "I don't have the money to pay you back right now," Frank admitted. "I'll need time to repay what I spent from our account." Frank had not only betrayed our relationship but had also stolen money I'd saved for our wedding to finance his systematic infidelity. 6 months later, Frank married one of the women he'd been having an affair with, using what remained of our wedding fund to pay for their ceremony. I learned that joint financial accounts require the same oversight and protection as business relationships, because romantic engagement doesn't prevent financial betrayal and theft. Frank taught me that some people view engagement as a trial period where they can explore other relationships while using their fiancé's money and emotional investment as backup options. The most important lesson was that wedding planning and shared financial goals reveal people's true priorities and commitment levels in ways that casual dating doesn't. The experience taught me that true commitment involves fidelity and financial honesty from the moment of engagement, not just after the wedding ceremony. Mandy's story shows how someone can weaponize shared financial goals to fund their betrayal while maintaining the illusion of commitment. Frank didn't just cheat, he used their wedding money to finance his affairs while planning their marriage. What's most cruel is how Frank convinced himself this was relationship research before making a commitment, when really he was stealing Mandy's money to explore whether he wanted to replace her while she planned their future together. The most important lesson is that love requires protecting the people we claim to care about when they're most vulnerable, not exploiting their weakness for our personal gain. Click the next video if these stories help you recognize the warning signs in your own relationships. I'll see you there.